It's such a joy to be with you here today, and actually a real joy to share the day with Sharon. Our paths have crossed over many, many years, but it's been a while since we've been in the same place together. But kind of having that sense of, how do I follow that? I've been racking my brains for who've been the famous people that I've met, and the only one that I can dredge up is randomly bumping into Ian Beale in Curry's one time when we were both buying toasters. I didn't get a photo of that moment. In fact, I just kind of really embarrassed myself because, when you see somebody that's kind of familiar but you can't place them. So I think I just did the hiya kind of, and then walked on and was like, oh, I think that was somebody famous. Get out the shop. So yes, that was probably the highlight of my career in meeting famous people. But in this session, we're going to be looking at this theme of retreat, and taking more of the focus about who are we as those that lead children to Jesus, those that walk alongside them in our relationship with him, and to look at, well, what does that mean for us? That if Jesus is who we're going to be sharing, then actually how do we make sure that Jesus is the main thing in our lives? And I remember a really... an incident that happened quite a long time ago now, but every time I think about it, I still go cold when I remember it. I was working as a youth and children's pastor. This is many, many moons ago when I first started out. And we'd gone on a youth group weekend away up to Keswick and had the most brilliant time. It was really good. It's time to come home, got everybody onto the minibus. We're driving down the M6. I was driving the minibus. And I have to give a caveat to this, that it was back in the day when we weren't so troubled by things like registers and stuff. So I'm driving down the M6, and I suddenly have this thought of, oh, it might be a good idea to check I've got them all. Note to self, probably worth doing that before you leave. And so I'm driving down the M6, watching the traffic, but also in the rearview mirror, trying to count all the heads that I can see. And I kept coming up one short. I was just like, oh, what am I going to do? Try it again. Still one short. Like, we're going to have to turn around, go back, see where we might have left them, think up the reason I can give to their parent about that this might have happened. And then suddenly she sat up. I thought, oh, we've got them all. And in this moment of, I didn't know whether to be relieved or like, what were you doing? She just said, oh, Ruth, I've just been praying for you. So I was kind of like, my work here is done. We've had an amazing weekend away, and here she is praying for me. And I was like, oh, thank you. That's wonderful. She said, yeah, and I just really felt that what God was saying was, he loves all the stuff that you do for us, but sometimes he would just like to meet with Ruth. And I was just cut to the core. And that has stayed with me 25 years later. Of sometimes I live up to the title. That becomes the whole preoccupation. Youth pastor, children's pastor, coordinator of discipleship. And that sticks in my mind so often. Sometimes he would just like to meet with Ruth. And I don't know how you find that for me, I can see that there are different warning points that come when I know I've gone too far in the other direction, that it's right to be concerned about things. But I've come to that realization that it's easy to believe that if we're helping others to grow spiritually, then we must be doing so ourselves. And actually, over the years, I've come to realize that that's not necessarily true. And that even while things up front can be looking good, there can be something that's happening in my own heart that isn't about spiritual growth. It's about getting a job done. It's about going on to the next thing. It's about busyness and being consumed in that. So busy doing the work of God, we miss the vital importance of being with God and being the people of God. And I was really struck many, many years ago, John Westerhoff, who's been a leading thinker on faith development, he wrote a book called Will Our Children Have Faith? And his conclusion was, in doing all this research about will our children have faith, his conclusion was that yes, our children will have faith if they're part of a community where they see that faith lived out, not just taught, and lived out in other generations than their own. So those that are younger than them as they grow up, but those that are older than them, that there is something about seeing this faith in action. And so that caution that as the children that we work with, that we walk alongside, to know that they are looking at us to see, what does a person of God look like with skin on? I hear these stories, but what does it look like every day? And that challenge, and I don't know about you, but it makes my heart sort of gets the soberness of that actually there may be young eyes looking to see, what does a life of faith look like? Not about perfection, often it's about wrestling, but actually seeking to live this out. And it reminded me of a time when I was working in Birmingham Diocese, and we were heading up to a conference a bit like this. And in the week before it, I'd got really quite ill. And I did have to stay off work, but actually I was determined that I wasn't going to let my team down, that, despite barely being able to move, I was still going to work. And so I was on the phone. Thank goodness we couldn't do video calls in those days. On the phone, sending emails through, getting stuff done. And we did the event, and it was a good day. But afterwards, one of my team sat me down, and she said, "You do realise, though, what you've now taught us, don't you?" And I was like, "What's that?" She said, "That we can never be ill. And that if we are, we have to truck on and get on with stuff, because you've shown us that that's what you have to do." And I was like, "Well, no, I was just trying not to let you down. I was trying not to put a burden on you." It's like, nope. The overwhelming message we've got is you cannot be ill. You cannot take time off. And it made me reflect on these things of actually so much of what we do. There's a lot that is learnt by what we teach, but so much is caught by who we are, isn't it? And the things that we do. That, I always struck by when I was a primary teacher, how alert children are to make sure that the pictures match the words. And if you start reading a story where the words don't match the picture, they're very quick to point it out. And there's something about that will our children have faith? Well, are they seeing faith lived out? Do our stories match our words? Do the pictures of our lives match the stories that we're telling them? And so, these are a few checkpoints that I've sort of come to reflect on over the years when I realised perhaps things have got out of kilter. The first one is this, that I do read my Bible, but often it's only for preparation for a session. That actually the first thought is, that will go really well for so-and-so, or that'll be a really good passage for this. So yes, I am reading my Bible so I can tick that box, but it's always for preparation. The second one, so I do pray, but it's usually about the group. And I don't think there is anything wrong in that. I would encourage that. But when that becomes the sole focus, and often of me presenting my list of requests to God about who I'd like to be there and who perhaps maybe could take a Sunday off, those kind of things, think, well, actually, this has become very narrow, that there needs to be more to the way in which I pray in my prayer life than just focused on the group. And then the third one, I do go to church, but it's usually just to run the group. That actually, where is the community and fellowship beyond that? Where's the place where I'm getting fed? And so for me, these are often key checkpoints of how are we doing on this? Where is the balance? Because none of these things in and of themselves are bad. But it's when it becomes the sole focus that we suddenly end up that we're becoming a bit soul-starved. There's that whole thing. I had a great friend who used to always talk about getting fresh bread to share. And it's that whole idea of how do I get fresh bread so that there's something current to share. And so some warning signs that I see in my own life at times look a bit like this. A loss of passion for God and his word. That actually it feels like I'm just doing it out of duty rather than actually this is delight. Sometimes when prayer just feels too empty, that I sit down to pray and I just don't know what is it I'm praying for. Sometimes life feels too hard. That it's that sense of I'm carrying this on my own. And maybe an element of resentment starts coming in of, why is it always me that has to do this? I know for me, when I hear that echoing from my heart, something's not quite as it should be. When I find that I'm doing faith from memory, when I'm telling the stories of encounters with God, but they're from 1976, and it's kind of like, I'm dredging this up, it's coming from memory. Where is the current? Living life with God. And that just simple loss of joy in the ministry, where actually it has become a bit of a burden, where once I used to run for it, that sense of another Sunday or another midweek group. Those are often warning signs, aren't they, that things are getting a little bit out of kilter. So I'd like you just to take a moment, and if you're willing to, I'm not asking you to bare your souls here unless you would like to, but to share with each other, what for you do you notice are the warning signs when things are getting a little bit out of kilter? What are the checkpoints? What are the cautions of, I perhaps need to rebalance? Maybe when somebody would say to you, actually, sometimes God would just like to meet with you. So have a few moments to talk amongst yourselves about what are the things that you spot as indicators for you. Okay. Hearing the buzz has encouraged me that I'm not alone in this. That you're not all sitting there going, I don't know what she's talking about. Never feel that way. That's an encouragement, hopefully, to each other. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? How quickly something can turn, something that is good and can stay looking good on the surface. And I think throughout the whole of this, what's been on my mind is this isn't about pouring guilt onto each other. This is about an invitation to life. That it's so not about guilt and another thing I need to be doing. It's the invitation to come and rest and to have life, to know Jesus. And I'm really struck by, the first and the second commandments, which I love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and to love your neighbour as yourself. The fact that the second must flow from the first, but the second isn't necessarily an indicator of the first. But if we're doing the second without the first, we end up in a bad place. That it flows from loving God, and out of that overflow of loving him and knowing ourselves loved, that out of that overflow, we love our neighbour, we love the children that are a part of our lives. And I just want to read a short passage from John 15, which may be one that's familiar to many of you, where Jesus addresses this issue. It's the passage of the vine and the branches. And Jesus says this, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. This really clear picture, isn't it, of this sense of abiding. And what I was struck, when you read through the Gospels and sort of read them in one go, when Jesus called the disciples, one of the first things that the Gospel writers say is that he called the disciples to come and be with him. For anything else, he called them to be with him. That there was something not just about hearing his teaching, but actually spending time with him that he knew would be caught as much as what he would teach. That sense of being with, that knowing, I don't know about you, whether there are people in your life that you know that's just simply by being with them. They make you think differently. They want you to behave differently. There's something about them that influences you. I remember as a late teen going and spending quite a bit of time with another family. And the mum in that family, who I have to confess as I was reflecting on this, in my mind was this older lady. She was probably younger than I am now. But, as a late teen, it's like this older lady that I aspired to be like. And I remember going home and writing this about it. It was in the days when I used to write really beautiful, flowery journals. I wrote this. I was like, she exudes this sense of calm. And she invites those around her to rest as well. She speaks comfort and offers others the grace to be and the room to become. Her spacious soul invites others to come, to be, and to see that the Lord is good. And I remember writing that and have kept it with me as this sort of aspiration of actually, that's what I would like to become like when I grow up. That I would love that to be the sense that I can offer to other people a spacious place to come and be and to become. And I think that's what Jesus knew in saying, come and be with me. Don't just go and do for me. Come and be with me. And there is something about my life that will so captivate you that you won't be asking questions around, is this worth it or should I do it? You will be so captivated by the beauty and the joy of his life that it changes you bit by bit. And so in John 15, Jesus' invitation, in some translations it says, abide in me, and I'll abide in you. And the word means, it has a number of meanings, doesn't it? Come and stay, come and dwell, or essentially come and make your home in me. That this isn't a transient thing, this isn't something that you just dip into every now and then. It's this sense of come and make your home in my heart. Come and make your home in my presence by the Spirit. And stay there. And so that is always your launch point for everywhere you go, everybody you meet, and everything that you do. 10 times in this passage, he says, remain in me, abide in me. It's really mattered that there is something about being rooted, isn't there? Held close, being attached to the vine. And John Mark Comer, who is an author and a pastor in America, he said, this isn't asking us to do something that we're not already doing. That whether we are aware of it or not, we're all abiding in something. He asked the question around, in those quiet moments, where does your mind go to? Because that is your emotional home. That if in those quiet spaces when you have a moment, your mind goes to flicking through Instagram, which is totally great for if you're doing Board of Education, Instagram. Get that in there. Is that good? Yep. Does it go to worry? Does it go to, I have to confess, sometimes my default place is a Lionel Richie song, which really troubles me. It's kind of like, Lionel, where did you come from? Can't believe I'm sharing that. But his whole thing is, as you're abiding in me, as you make your home in me, your default place is your mind goes to Jesus. When the worry comes, your mind goes to Jesus. When you're thinking of different situations, your mind goes to Jesus. And he says, where you abide determines the fruit of your life. And we see that, don't we? That where we're abiding is actually fueling ourselves with worry. The fruit of that in our own lives is greater worry. But he's saying, actually, if you come and you abide in Jesus, the fruit of that is the fruit of the Spirit, where we discover that we are knowing his peace, his goodness, his kindness, his gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Those things are being formed in us as we abide in him. And as one friend said to me recently, she said, I like me better when I've been with Jesus. And I was like, so do I. I mean, not just of her, but I was like, so do I. That actually there is a difference, there is a peace that comes from abiding in him. And a Quaker writer called Thomas Kelly wrote this. He said, how then shall we live this life of prayer without ceasing? We do it by quiet, persistent practice in turning all of our being day and night in prayer and inward worship and surrender towards him who calls to the deep of our souls. Mental habits of inward orientation must be established. Just keep turning your mind to him. Keep turning your affection, turning your heart. Abide in him on a moment-by-moment basis. And as you read on in this passage in John 15, there's a really beautiful bit where Jesus is saying to the disciples, as we work together, you're not my slaves, you're my friends. And we do this together. And there is such a difference, isn't there, in being involved in ministry when you know you're doing it as a cooperative friend of Jesus, not as a slave or out of duty. And however you found yourself getting involved in children's ministry, it may simply have been there was nobody else. But you know, God is bigger than that. That God knew before the foundations of the earth that this time was orchestrated for you to be part of this. And he invites you as friends, he invites me as friend, to come and walk and work alongside him. To do that together, not out of duty and out of servanthood, although there is a place for servant ministry, but in this context, we do this as friends. So in every moment of every day. And I love the theologian Tom Wright, he says that often when we're reading the Gospels, we should read them twice. He says the first time you should read them, and you read them for the story that they are. They're about real people in a real time, and you read them for the story that they are. He says, but then you should read them again and imagine in your mind that you're sitting on a bench and Jesus comes and sits next to you and says, so how are we doing on this? And I always think that's a really great invitation, that when you read things of stories of other people's lives, the stories of the disciples, the people that Jesus met, to read them for the stories they are, but to hear Jesus' invitation of, well, how are we doing on this? Are you knowing your heart at peace? Are you excited about what's ahead? Do you hear clearly his invitation and in his call? And so there's something about, isn't there, the moment by moment. In 1 Peter, he talks about walking through your day with a deep consciousness of God. I love that idea, that actually in every moment, there is nowhere we step outside of God's presence. Sometimes we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. But then there need to be those intentional times of retreat when we step back. And that may be in the course of each day, if it's just for a few moments, and maybe throughout the course of a year of taking a longer time to say, I want to intentionally step back, regroup, refocus, spend time with Jesus. And the author, Ruth Hassall Barton, says this. She says, when we hear the word retreat, many of us think of the military use of the word, which refers to the tactic troops use when they're losing too much ground, when they're tired and ineffective, and when there have been too many casualties or the current strategies not working. When any of these scenarios are in play, the commander might instruct the troops to pull back and put some distance between themselves and the battle line. We often see this as a negative thing. However, military retreat can also be a wise tactic, an opportunity to rest the troops, to tend to their wounds, to stop the enemy's momentum, or to step back to get a panoramic view of what's going on and set new strategies. In fact, the military is now using a more positive term, strategic withdrawal, to describe retreat. And it is, isn't there, that sense that that's one particular context and setting. But actually, that is the rhythm that Jesus invites us to, that there are times when we need to retreat. That you know that if you've been in ministry for any length of time, there are wounds that get acquired along the way, aren't there? And sometimes it needs time to just step back, to have the wounds attended to. Sometimes it's you're just simply tired. Been walking this road for a long time, been carrying stories of different people for a long time, needing that place of retreat. You can step back, get some rest, hear Jesus' voice in his heart again for what it is that you're doing, reset, go out with new strength and new clarity. Because her warning is, she says this, while on the surface it might seem like all is well, sometimes a hardening has taken place. Ironically, those tight, hurting places are tender and can flare with pain when touched in the wrong way by some poor, unsuspecting soul. And there might also be numb places where we simply cannot feel anything at all. Jesus knew the wisdom of this, that it can't all be go, go, go. And particularly for those that are serving and trying to walk alongside others and to grow in faith together, there is that sense of needing to retreat, getting perspective restored, having wounds tended to, getting some rest, and hearing his voice again. And as you read through the Gospels, you see that Jesus talks about 3 different types of retreat, 3 different models, essentially, that he enacts himself through the Gospels. The first one is the quiet place. I don't know if you've noticed as you read through the Gospels, often they can be going full pelt, full pelt, full pelt, and great things are happening, the crowds are gathering, people are being healed, and then Jesus says to the disciples, come, let's go to a quiet place. And you can think, they may well be thinking, but look what's happening. Do we not just need to, put another leg on the tour? This is going well. She's like, no, let's go to the quiet place where we retreat, where we get some rest, where we can share together the things that God is doing. Come away to this deserted place. Let's be on our own. Rest a while. The second place that we remember, particularly through Lent, is the place of the wilderness. That we know that straight after Jesus' baptism, the Spirit took him into the wilderness where he was tempted. And we can often think of the wilderness as a negative place where battle is done. And sometimes that is true. That's what Jesus experienced there. But when you read through the Old Testament, often when God talks about the wilderness and invites his people into the wilderness, it's actually about a place of knowing his closeness, of noticing his tenderness, where all distraction is removed, that it's a place where we can know him deeply, when he tenderly is able to speak to those things that our souls really need to hear. In Hosea, the prophet says this, that God is speaking to the people of Israel. He says, "Therefore, I'm now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope." Achor is the valley of trouble. I'll make the valley of trouble a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came out of Egypt. This place, this wilderness place, is one that God was saying, "I'm going to pull you into so you can hear my heart again. I'm going to speak tenderly to you. We're going to restore that joy and that life so that you're ready to go back out." There's a beautiful story I was speaking on recently, something that reminded again, the story of Hagar, found in the Old Testament. In many ways, one of those stories that didn't really need to be recorded because it fits in the middle of Abraham and Sarah. But actually, Hagar finds herself out in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, she encounters the angel of the Lord. And she's the first person in the Bible who gets to name God. And she says, "I have seen the God who sees me." That's what she calls him. That she knows in the wilderness where everything else has been removed, all her security, all her certainty, she meets with God and says, "I have seen the one who sees me. In this place I can be quiet. Know that his eye is on me, that his heart is for me." And the angel of the Lord asks her this question of, where have you come from and where are you going to? And I've come to learn that in the Bible, when God asks the question, it's not usually because he doesn't know the answer. It's because he's asking us to look at what's going on in our hearts. Where have you come from? Where are you going? What's that about? How do we talk about these things together? Clearly, something very special happens with God's people in the wilderness place. And my encouragement to you would be, if you're finding yourself there right now, and it can just feel like this sort of desert place, I don't want to diminish what that feels like. I've been there. I know how it feels. But to know that in that place, you are with the God who sees you, who speaks tenderly to you. He wants to remind you that before you do anything for him, you're his. He wants your heart before your hands. And to have that place of knowing him. And the third type of retreat that Jesus talks about that's held in the Bible is the retreat of Sabbath. The first retreat that was set for us as a rhythm of life. And unfortunately, somewhere over the years, it's become like a good suggestion rather than the commandment that it is. As a life group in our church, we've been exploring more the practices of Jesus and actually doing them. And so Sabbath was one that we started with, about what does it mean to Sabbath, to truly rest, to have a day that is different to all the others. And it's challenging trying to make that happen. But we are just so learning. It is changing us. And the rewards of it, there is wisdom. God knew that we need that space of withdrawal, of Sabbath, of resting with him. So how do we do that? Quickly, some thoughts. And you might want to share together on your tables in a moment, what is it for you that you find helps you to retreat, whether it's for a few moments each day or for sort of longer time. So first thing, back to the basics. I think it's about rediscovering God's love for us, for the person that you are, not for the work that you do, so that all that we do is an overflow of his love, not as trying to dredge it up from our own resources. One 14th century Eastern Orthodox writer said this: "The most important thing that happens between God and the human soul is to love and to be loved." And I have to say, I had to sit with that for a while and think, is that true? Do I believe that? That is the most important thing? And actually, as you read through the Gospels, as you read through the story of the Bible, this is at the core of it all, isn't it? That when you know yourself to be loved and are able to love, it changes everything. And you know that you are loved by pure love itself. It changes everything about us. So keep coming back to the basics, reminding yourselves you are held in the love of God. You're his beloved. That's the first banner he holds over you, before the banner of children's minister, or however you phrase it in your context. But secondly, stay connected to God. I think it's really encouraging that in recent years there's been a real sort of a re-emergence of interest in what we used to call the spiritual disciplines, but perhaps now more are being called spiritual practices. This idea that there are things that we can do that help us. They're not there for their own right, but they're there to lead us closer to Jesus, to create that space. So times of reading, of prayer, of worship, of solitude, of silence, of generosity, all those different things. So looking at what are the different things that we can engage in each day. Maybe taking time just to think on a single Bible verse and journaling some thoughts of what does it speak to you of? What is God saying to you through that? Taking some time to be alone wherever you can grasp that, even if it's a few minutes in the loo, just go and grab those moments. Just being alone with him. Maybe each night taking a few moments to reflect on your day, to see where was the goodness of God at work? Where were those moments where I really knew his presence? And maybe where were the moments where I missed his grace that I want to be aware of, so tomorrow I go into it differently, knowing that he is at work. That if your Bible readings become stagnant, then do something about it. There are so many things, aren't there, today that are on offer for us to be able to engage with that, to keep being fed so you have fresh bread to share and offer to others. Because I think there is that challenge, isn't there, from John 15, which I find really stark, of where Jesus says, without me, you can do nothing that will last. And I think the temptation is to think, but there are things I can do. There's actually quite a bit. But actually, it's that whole thing of nothing that will be of lasting, eternal kingdom value. It's got to be connected to the vine. And if we're finding ourselves disconnected, then that will impact the fruit that we're building. And I think there is something about making time for fun, isn't there? That actually we can get so caught up in all the things that need doing that sometimes to be able to go and have fun and to laugh, I believe, is a real gift of God, of just being able to, when you suddenly realize when you have one of those good belly laughs and you think, I've not hurt like this for a long time. That sense of actually just having some fun, I think God delights in that when we have joy. And so this rhythm of life that Jesus holds out, that yes, there's absolutely a time to go, but there's also a time to come. I love the way which Eugene Peterson captures Matthew 11, where he says this: are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I think that's the invitation, isn't it? That we need to keep remembering that things are so busy. There is so much to be done, and there is always more to be done. That is the reality. But the invitation is, yes, go and do these things, but come back. Be restored, be renewed, be refreshed. Come and drink again and be renewed. That's what it is we have to pass on, isn't it? And that's not just for the sake of those we leave. I think it's primarily for that sake of being children of God, for our own relationship with him, to know ourselves loved and to be able to love, so that out of our overflow we can love well those that are sharing our life at this point in time. And so, as we just bring this bit to a close, I don't know where this lands with you. For different ones, it will be different things. Some of you will feel that you have a really good rhythm. For others, there may be that sense of that weariness, that tiredness, that longing to hear again. And so I would just want to say this is the invitation. It's not about guilt. It's that invitation that sometimes Jesus says, come aside to the quiet place. I'll meet you there. There are things I'd love to say to you. Things I would love for you to hear, for you to know. And so we're going to just take a few moments. We're going to sing again together as we come into lunch. But to use this time, there are two great questions that, again, Ruth Haley Barton often asks leaders to reflect on. The two questions are these. Firstly, what is it that your soul needs to say to God? And then secondly, what is it that God longs to say to your soul? And so maybe in this space, and use this time to reflect. I've brought a few books here that you might want to look at later. I won't mention them now, but to look at how do we do spiritual disciplines? How do we get them into our everyday life? There are some books there you might want to look at. But just to take this moment to reflect, to imagine, what is it your soul needs to say to God? And what is it that he longs to say to your soul? And we're going to worship together. But let me pray, and then I'm going to hand over to Ben. Loving God, we thank you so much for the gift of your word. Father, thank you that in it we see real people who live their lives with you. And Jesus, I thank you that the invitation that you gave them, you hold out to us. And Lord, I pray for each person here today. Father, thank you for them. Thank you for the calling that you have put on their lives. Thank you for their hearts for you and for the children in their communities. And so, Lord, I just want to pray that in this moment, Father, thank you that you know each one. You know what is held in each one's heart. Lord, I pray that you would come and speak your tender word, that you would come and renew and restore and refresh. Thank you, Lord, that the only reason we can truly love is because you first loved us. And we give you our thanks. Amen.